5 years from now, Oracle will be primarily an infrastructure company, not a database or applications company. I mean, not that it's going to toss those businesses, but in terms of the volume, and this is from a company which essentially started late in the cloud.
Welcome to It's About Data, episode 30. This time we're discussing Oracle AI World 2025.
Tony, great to see you virtually. I actually recently got to record with you live for the first time in Los Angeles. But since then, you've been on the road and just came back from Oracle AI World.
It's been a crazy month. With Teradata, there was also SAP and IBM. And then, of course, DBT, or I should say 5-Trana DBT,
yes,
making their blockbuster announcement, which, of course, we did discuss, in a recent episode. Oracle AI World, in that context, did not disappoint. In terms of that, they came up with the next major long-term release of their database. They finally came out at long last, I would say, Lakehouse. And I think there was just some really interesting developments regarding the direction of their business. So there was just a lot of food for thought on this one. We'll start off basically with database, and basically, and Oracle's been following this pattern now for roughly about the past decade, which is that they have every 5 or 6 years they do a long-term release, and before that they do all the essentially what they call the innovation releases, like the incremental releases where all the new features come in. And so when they come up with the new long-term release, to some extent, it's kind of like, it's like the old Holiday Inn campaign. The best surprise is no surprise in terms of, what a lot of the features are, but now it's being supported in the flagship. And this becomes the platform, the definitive platform, to upgrade to. Yeah. So the new platform is 26 AI.
And how long do they intend to support it, out of curiosity? Are these like decade releases?
It's basically a minimum. At this point, they're saying that 5 years.
Okay, that's until the next one, at least.
And so it's going to be 5 years plus or minus, because the last one was 19 AI. Now, of course, you could say that the pandemic probably, there was some time off for the pandemic. So it still looks like it's the 5-year cadence.
Yeah.
And so there's been a number of things that have been going on. So as I said, some of the things that are just not surprising, in some of the incremental, 23, the previous 23 AI release, you had a number of dot releases. So, which included, for instance, binary vector format. So for more efficient storage of vectors, as opposed to, flat storage. They also basically expanded their what we call duality. They call it, duality is essentially kind of like it's almost like a materialized view on a database, except it's not physically materialized. It's a virtual view, and it's done. I mean, they use GraphQL to essentially map your view to what's basically data that's stored in a canonical relational format. And so they introduced JSON, duality, I think about 2 or 3 years ago. They enhanced that now with views of JSON collections to make this more competitive for developers that are used to working with MongoDB.
And they've added document database.
Exactly. I mean, Mongo is essentially de facto standard there.
Yeah.
With BSON, and of course they've added some additional bells and whistles with hidden, calculated fields.
Yeah.
And then, with 23 AI, they had introduced vector storage, and of course that's become table stakes for most databases these days. And what they introduced, along the way was sharding, so that you could basically spread out the storage of these vectors to really, scale up the processing. And with that, they've also added what they call elastic memory management, so that when you do some of those blowout, basically high volume, basically similarity searches, AI searches, that you can take advantage of caching to improve performance. But I think one of the most interesting features that they've come up with is what they call the private AI container.
Interesting.
And
okay.
The guiding notion to this is that Oracle's approach to security and governance is to put all this in the database, not to. I mean, there's obviously going to be different views whether you should do it in the application tier or the database tier. Traditionally, I think with most enterprise applications, it's been enforced by the application. But the idea of putting it in the database is you have fewer round trips. So you can basically guard the data kind of at the source instead of having to rely on a perimeter where you have to rely on hops. And with the idea of the private AI container is that you literally can containerize these protections so that in case you're submitting that data to an external language model, because not all models are going to be available for processing in database. So you have to go out to say, for instance, like if you're on Oracle multi-cloud, you want to take advantage of SageMaker or Vertex AI, you have to send the data out. This puts a private container around it, so it enforces all those protections. It's like a wrapper of all those protections around that data.
Got it.
That can be enforced when that data is outside the database. And I thought that was a really interesting, a really interesting feature. Now, some of the other things that come in on 26AI, again, they've had what they call Select AI, which is the ability to essentially, generate. It's kind of like SQL code generation.
Yeah.
That's become kind of table stakes. They've also added now the ability to, select the AI agent to trigger an agent using a SQL command.
And are you allowed to choose your own agents, or are these managed and built by Oracle essentially?
You would be choosing your own agents.
Okay.
So this is not within the walled garden. And they've added something which is kind of interesting. It's not AI related. This is more like Redis or Valkey killer related, which is what they call true cache. So in other words, how we've, in the past, we've put, there have been numbers of, over the years, we've put together tiers atop the database to speed transaction processing or to scale it. Back in the the Web 1.0 era, we put app servers in, which is the old transaction monitor. Over the past, Redis basically popularized the cache that sits in front of a database, which is essentially a key value store. Well, true cache is truly relational and it's truly consistent up to that point in time. So it really extends the relational database to that caching layer. It's essentially
just built in so that you only have the classic one neck to choke, right? You only have to deal with Oracle. You don't have to talk to Redis or Valkey.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's the Redis killer, basically. And they've added also what's interesting. This was also an interim release that now is part of 26 AI. Is the Oracle globally distributed database with support for Raft replication. And Raft evidently is, it's part of when you have an active. And evidently the idea with Raft is it's a lot less chatty in terms of getting to consensus than say like the Paxos protocols that have been common up till now. Again, you really need to be like a gearhead to really understand the distance.
Interesting. I'd love to hear. So Martin Kleppman wrote the classic Designing Data Intensive Applications. I was doing a review of it, the new edition for O'Reilly recently. I'd love to hear his take on it because he goes through all kinds of consensus algorithms and such.
Oh yeah, no, this is something where Oracle was really looking at what was going on in the community. They were not trying to reinvent the wheel, by any stretch or means. And finally, just in terms of what's really interesting, and this is sort of, it's not directly related to JSON duality, but it's kind of appealing to those programmers. Is JavaScript stored procedures? How about that?
Okay. Yeah. And you've had that in like Snowflake and some other databases for a while. Or at least UDFs, user-defined functions. So it doesn't surprise me, but I'd be curious to know, again, the details.
Exactly. So anyway, so those are the real headlines. And essentially what this means is all the stuff we've been hearing about for the last 5 years, it's now in the long-term version. It's now the definitive version. That should basically diffuse it, basically fan out, to most of the customer base.
Yeah, because they have to upgrade.
And definitely will happen in the cloud.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. Okay, so database announcements. Of course, what we've seen in the last several months, in actually the past 6 months in our discussions, is that Oracle is quickly evolving from being a very database-focused company to focusing on a lot of other things.
Yeah, that would be true. Before we get to that, I do want to put in a word for the Lakehouse. Oracle finally has done the Lakehouse, and I think it's not news that they're doing it. It's news that they're finally doing it. But I think in Oracle's case, they wanted to hold off till they could get it right. And there are a couple of key features in it. But one is that it is, if you are using the autonomous data warehouse, in the cloud service, you're automatically upgraded to this.
Yeah.
But basically, so they're supporting, all the core, Iceberg standards, including, the REST catalog API, which means that they can now read from any, catalog that supports that REST catalog API. So that means they can federate to Snowflake, to Unity catalog, et cetera, et cetera. But they put a couple things, and I think this is really what accounted for the weight, which is it's really about performance. So a couple things. So just one, they put in what they call the data lake accelerator, and that's essentially where, with Iceberg, it's kind of a monolithic architecture. This basically helps you really distribute it, so you can sort of kind of do a brute force approach of distributing onto multiple query engines. It's almost like sharding a query.
Yeah, and in practice, it often means that you're kind of materializing the Iceberg data into another data layer that's faster, right? Like Snowflake has been doing this for years with their materialized views over Parquet, but it totally makes sense. I mean, this is the modern strategy.
And kind of in that same vein, they've added what they call basically a cache. So, and again, it's really it's taking advantage of a practice we've been doing for years. Just, you always used to tier data. And so in the old days of disk, you'd put the hottest data on the edge of the disk and now essentially it's adding a cache, so you cache those Iceberg tables. The idea is to get the performance, which is on in basically in Parquet files, columnar Parquet format, sitting on cloud object storage, which is otherwise not optimized. This is another way of essentially kind of optimizing to get it to almost as good as, it's not going to be as good as native performance.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that and we'll finish with this, which is that for Oracle, it's really not about putting Exadata data into Iceberg, because the cost for storage, that OCI will charge you, whether it's in Iceberg table on object storage or it's in Exadata native smart storage, is the same.
Interesting. Okay.
So this is not about reducing the Exadata footprint. It's about really expanding the footprint to data that would not normally otherwise be in Exadata.
Yeah. And I think the big news here is that Oracle is shifting to focus more on interop, right? Like that's what this means, that you can attach to Iceberg storage and treat it almost as native storage.
Exactly.
But then other tools can read it. And to me, that fits into their evolution to becoming more of a cloud provider, because as a cloud provider, you have to do some level of interop. Like you're always trying to create a walled garden, but you have to play nice with other tools.
Now let's talk about that cloud stuff.
Exactly.
And it's kind of hard. Put it this way. At the end of their last quarter, I think it was Q1, they report over 450 billion of remaining performance obligations, which is the pipeline.
Yeah.
Of which 300 billion of that was OpenAI. Well, since that, they've added roughly about 65 billion, and it's not from OpenAI. So that pipeline is diversifying. So yes, there is a concern. I think we are concerned, can OpenAI basically achieve its conquer the universe strategy.
Yeah.
What this is to say is that, yes, a lot of Oracle's pipeline is based on Stargate, but it's becoming more and more diversified. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I was talking more broadly about this concept of backlog-oriented companies, right? Like Facebook traditionally, for example, Meta is not a backlog-oriented company. Big industrial companies tend to be backlog-oriented, where a lot of their quarterly reports are about how much backlog they have. And they'll spend decades building up a reputation for being a company that correctly reports the backlog. And then you can easily screw that up overnight by taking on some kind of tenuous backlogs. I kind of said General Electric got caught doing this, Boeing, Airbus, a bunch of companies have been caught doing this, and it hurt their reputations. But I think for Oracle now, the fact that they have this backlog from a company, Meta, which is known to pay its bills, is really going to help them greatly, right? Like, if OpenAI is a bit tenuous, at least you have the 65 billion from Meta.
Exactly. Put it this way. And we had this conversation a few weeks back when where there were all the headlines after all the Q1 numbers.
Right.
That on its current trajectory, 5 years from now, Oracle will be primarily an infrastructure company, not a database or applications company. Not that it's going to toss those businesses, but in terms of the volume, and this is from a company which essentially started late in the cloud, where the conventional wisdom was it's too late, but they differentiated it. And I'll just kind of conclude with that. What was interesting was that one of the keynotes was from Clay McGurk, and he was basically the guy really headed the OCI operation. Oh man, it was technical. My brain hurt.
Yeah, yeah. And
but he had to give that talk. He had to give that talk.
Well, some of the stuff you were talking about in your LinkedIn article about this reminded me, you were talking about network interface cards and making the conversation between network interface and the operating system more efficient. Amazon has been working on similar things where you're trying to create new mechanisms for hardware to communicate with processes versus the old OS mechanisms, because we have major bottlenecks in the old way of doing things.
Like the Nitro cards. And it's
exactly.
true.
Yep, that's right.
But it's not surprising that much of the brains of OCI came from people who had been working with, learned those lessons at AWS and Azure. The difference is at OCI, they got to start from scratch. So like with AWS, you have to kind of retrofit this over many generations of, and also, I mean, they have other innovations, such as being able to have a very flat network and being, a very flat topology, and being able to scale from as little as 3 racks up to however many. That's I think, quite a differentiator. But again, much longer discussion. We can revisit this again.
Yeah, we absolutely need to. But broadly, it's just very fascinating to see the cloud space diversifying, especially with the AWS outage. I'm sure a lot of customers are looking to diversify. So Oracle is well positioned, and this is going to be an ongoing conversation.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Lots of really cool stuff. And we'll be having another discussion soon about Data IQ.
Sounds good. Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Tony.